Marcus Chen stepped into the massive training hall of the Galactic Combat Academy, his worn human sneakers squeaking against the polished metal floor. The sound echoed through the chamber, drawing dozens of alien eyes toward him. Some beings had 4 eyes, others had compound vision like insects, and a few had sensory organs he couldn't even identify. All of them were staring. The Academy Hall stretched higher than any building Marcus had seen back on Earth. Holographic displays showed combat techniques from across the galaxy, while training equipment designed for beings with tentacles, claws and exoskeletons lined the walls. The air hummed with energy fields and the distant sounds of sparring matches. "Look what crawled out of the primitive sector," sneered Vextar, a 7-foot-tall reptilian whose scales gleamed like polished armor. His species, the Saurian Empire, had conquered half their galaxy before joining the Galactic Federation. "I heard humans just discovered faster-than-light travel 50 years ago." A group of aliens gathered around, their translator devices converting their various languages into standard galactic common. Marcus understood every word, though he wished he didn't. 50 years? Laughed Zix, a crystalline being whose body reflected light in rainbow patterns. "My people mastered combat arts when this human's planet was still cooling from its formation. How embarrassing that they let primitives into the academy." Marcus kept walking toward the registration desk, trying to ignore the comments. His acceptance letter to the Galactic Combat Academy had been the proudest moment of his life. Earth had only been part of the Galactic Federation for 30 years, and humans were still considered the newest, weakest members. Getting accepted here meant everything to his family and his planet's reputation. The registration officer was a mantoid, her insect-like head tilting as she examined Marcus with compound eyes. Her 4 arms worked quickly across a holographic interface, pulling up his file. "Marcus Chen, age 17, from Sol 3, also known as Earth," she read aloud. Her voice carried a clicking undertone that the translator couldn't quite smooth out. "Interesting. Your species has no recorded combat achievements in galactic history. No mention of advanced martial arts, no military victories against spacefaring civilizations. Are you certain you belong here?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady. "I earned my placement through the standard trials." The mantoid's head tilted further. "Curious. Most species that attend this academy have warrior traditions spanning millennia. The Krillian Empire has battle schools on every planet. The Vorthan Collective treats combat as a religious art. Even the peaceful aquatic nations have defensive techniques passed down through genetic memory." She paused, all 4 arms stopping their movement. "What combat traditions do humans possess?" Marcus thought about his answer carefully. Back home, he'd studied multiple martial arts since he could walk. His grandfather had been a Marine, his father a boxing coach, his mother a Aikido instructor. But compared to species that had been fighting galactic wars for thousands of years, human martial arts seemed almost quaint. "We have many fighting styles," he said finally. "Boxing, wrestling, various forms developed across our continents and cultures." Vextar burst into laughter, his reptilian voice booming across the hall. "Continental fighting styles? We develop combat techniques across solar systems. My species perfected warfare while yours was still hitting each other with sticks and stones." More aliens joined the growing crowd. Marcus spotted beings he'd only read about in Federation databases. A technological symbiont whose cybernetic enhancements glowed beneath artificial skin. 3 members of the Hive consciousness who moved in perfect synchronization. A massive Ursine whose bear-like features and 10-foot frame made Marcus feel like a child. "I heard humans still use projectile weapons," added one of the Hive consciousness members. "Metal bullets fired by chemical explosions. How charmingly primitive." "And they only live about 80 years, said the technological symbiont. "Barely enough time to master basic techniques. I've been perfecting my combat algorithms for 3 centuries. The mantoid completed Marcus's registration and handed him a small device. "This is your class scheduler and academy map. Your first combat evaluation is tomorrow at 800 Standard Time. I suggest you observe today's advanced classes to understand the level of skill expected here." Marcus took the device and bowed slightly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," the mantoid replied. 60% of first-year students drop out within the first month. For species without established combat traditions, that number rises to 90%. As Marcus walked away from the registration desk, the crowd of aliens followed, their comments growing louder and more pointed. "I give him 3 days," Vextar announced. "Humans are too soft for real combat training. 3 days is generous, replied Zix. I've studied human anatomy. They're fragile, slow, and lack natural weapons. No claws, no armored skin, no poisonous secretions. How did such a vulnerable species even survive to reach the stars? The massive Ursine stepped directly into Marcus's path, forcing him to stop. Little human, he rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. I am Gorth of the Northern Reaches. My people have fought the ice giants of 17 worlds. We crushed titanium with our bare hands. Perhaps you should reconsider your enrollment before you get seriously injured. Marcus looked up at the towering alien, feeling the weight of every stair in the hall. Part of him wanted to turn around and book passage back to Earth. The rational part of his mind agreed with everything they were saying. Humans were newcomers to galactic civilization. They didn't have the advantages of other species. They hadn't spent millennia perfecting combat arts. But another part of him, the part that had gotten him this far, refused to back down. I appreciate your concern, Marcus said quietly, meeting Gorth's massive black eyes, but I'm not here to drop out. I'm here to earn my black belt. The entire hall erupted in laughter. Even species that didn't normally show emotion seemed amused by his statement. The sound echoed off the high ceiling, bouncing back down like a wave of mockery. Black belt? Wheezed Vextar between laughs. What is this, some primitive ranking system? We have combat hierarchies that span galactic classifications. A human black belt, Zix added, his crystalline form sparkling with what Marcus assumed was laughter. I must record this for the Academy archives. Future students will find it hilarious. Marcus felt his face burn with embarrassment, but he kept his expression neutral. Tomorrow would be his first real test. Tomorrow, he'd find out if a human could truly belong among the galaxy's greatest warriors. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Training Hall 7 30 minutes early. The massive space was already bustling with activity as alien students practiced their techniques. He found a spot against the wall and watched, trying to understand what he was up against. A group of Saurian students practiced something that looked like a combination of wrestling and aerial combat. They leaped impossible heights, their powerful legs launching them 15 feet into the air, while their tail strikes created sonic booms that shook the floor. Their scales seemed to harden during combat, turning their entire bodies into living weapons. Near the center of the hall, 3 members of the Hive Consciousness moved in perfect unison, demonstrating a fighting style that relied on absolute coordination. They struck and blocked as one organism, each movement flowing seamlessly into the next. Their telepathic connection allowed them to anticipate attacks before they happened and respond with inhuman precision. The technological symbiont students fascinated Marcus the most. Their cybernetic enhancements gave them abilities that seemed like magic. One student's arms extended like telescoping rods, allowing him to strike opponents from 20 feet away. Another's vision systems provided real-time combat analysis, highlighting weak points and optimal strike angles in his opponent's stance. Overwhelming, isn't it? Said a voice beside him. Marcus turned to see a slender, blue-skinned humanoid with large, dark eyes. Her species was unfamiliar to him, but her translator badge identified her as Lyra from the Peaceful Worlds Coalition. I'm starting to understand why everyone thinks I don't belong here, Marcus admitted. Lyra's expression was sympathetic. I felt the same way when I arrived. My people are pacifists by nature. We've spent the last 2,000 years developing conflict resolution and meditation techniques. Fighting goes against everything we believe. Then why are you here? Same reason as you, I suspect. To prove that we're more than what others expect. She gestured toward the sparring aliens. Everyone here has advantages. Natural weapons, enhanced abilities, centuries of combat tradition. But they also have weaknesses. Watch closer. Marcus followed her gaze to the Saurian students. Now that he observed more carefully, he noticed their high-energy attacks came with a cost. After each explosive movement, they needed several seconds to recover. Their powerful builds made them incredibly strong, but also somewhat slow to change direction. The Hive Consciousness members were perfectly coordinated, but that coordination required constant mental connection. When one instructor deliberately disrupted their telepathic link with a psionic scrambler, they became confused and disoriented, bumping into each other as they tried to re-establish contact. Even the technological symbiont students had limitations. Their cybernetic enhancements were powerful but also complex. Marcus watched one student's arm extension mechanism jam during a practice drill, leaving him defenseless while he tried to reset the system. "Every strength is also a weakness," Lyra said softly. "The question is, what are human strengths?" Before Marcus could answer, Instructor Thanemore entered the hall. The alien species was unknown to most students, his form shifting slightly as if he existed partially in another dimension. His reputation, however, was well known throughout the academy. He had trained combat specialists for over 500 years and never accepted excuses or showed favoritism. "New students, step forward," Thanemore commanded, his voice carrying an authority that made the entire hall fall silent. Marcus and 12 other first-day students moved to the center of the training area. The instructor's shifting form studied each of them with an intensity that felt like being examined under a microscope. "Combat evaluation begins now," Thanemore announced. "Each student will face a second-year opponent in controlled sparring. Victory conditions are simple. Force your opponent to yield, achieve a dominant position for 10 seconds, or land 3 clean strikes. Medical systems will prevent serious injury." He gestured to a group of advanced students who stepped forward as opponents. Marcus's heart sank as he realized his opponent would be Kethryn, a third-year Krillian student whose species was famous for their berserker fighting style. Kethryn stood 8 feet tall, with 4 muscular arms and bone spikes protruding from his shoulders and forearms. "This is unfortunate," Lyra whispered. "Krillian combat style is pure aggression. They train to ignore pain and fight until they physically cannot continue." The first match began between an Aquatic Nation student and a Saurian second year. The aquatic being's fluid movements were beautiful to watch, but the Saurian's raw power overwhelmed her defenses within seconds. She yielded after taking a tail strike that sent her sliding across the training mat. The second match featured a young technological symbiont against a Vorthon opponent. The cyber-enhanced student's analytical systems gave him a significant advantage, allowing him to predict and counter his opponent's moves with mechanical precision. The Vorthon yielded after being trapped in an impossible position. One by one, the new students faced their tests. Most lost quickly, overwhelmed by their opponent's experience and natural advantages. A few managed to hold their own for several minutes before being defeated. Only one new student, a massive Ursine, managed to defeat his opponent through sheer strength and endurance. "Marcus Chen of Earth," Thanemore called. "You will face Kethryn of the Krillian Death Worlds." The hall grew quiet as Marcus stepped onto the training mat. Whispers rippled through the watching crowd, most of them betting on how quickly the human would be defeated. Kethryn flexed his forearms, bone spikes extending from his forearms like natural weapons. His species' combat philosophy was simple: attack relentlessly until your opponent could no longer fight back. Subtlety and defense were considered weaknesses. "I will try to make this quick, little human," Kethryn said, his voice carrying a surprisingly respectful tone. "You do not deserve to suffer unnecessarily." Marcus took his fighting stance, a modified version of the mixed martial arts style he'd learned on Earth. His grandfather's voice echoed in his mind. "Size and strength matter, but speed and technique matter more. Use what your opponent gives you." Thanemore raised his hand. "Combat begins. Now." Kethryn charged forward with frightening speed, all forearms moving in coordinated strikes designed to overwhelm Marcus through pure volume of attacks. The bone spikes on his forearms whistled through the air as he launched a series of devastating blows. Marcus did something that surprised everyone watching. He moved backward. Not running, not fleeing, but moving with purpose. He weaved between Kethryn's strikes, letting the powerful blows pass inches from his body. The Krillian's berserker style was impressive, but it was also predictable. Each attack committed him to a specific motion, creating brief moments of vulnerability. For 30 seconds, Marcus did nothing but dodge, studying his opponent's patterns. Kethryn grew frustrated, his attacks becoming wider and more aggressive. The crowd began to murmur, confused by the human's passive strategy. Then Marcus saw his opportunity. Kethryn's next attack was his most powerful yet, a four-armed strike intended to end the match immediately. All of his bone spikes aimed for Marcus's center mass in a coordinated assault that should have been impossible to escape. Marcus dropped low, sliding beneath the attack pattern like a baseball player stealing second base. As Kethryn's momentum carried him forward, Marcus swept his legs, using the Krillian's own charging force against him. The 8-foot alien crashed to the training mat with a thunderous impact that shook the entire hall. Before Catherine could recover, Marcus had moved behind him, applying a rear naked choke that his father had taught him years ago. The technique was simple but effective. Cut off blood flow to the brain, and even the strongest opponent would lose consciousness. Catherine thrashed wildly, his forearms reaching back to grab Marcus, but the human had positioned himself perfectly in the Krillion's blind spot. The bone spikes that made Catherine so dangerous in frontal combat were useless when his opponent was directly behind him. Impossible, someone whispered from the watching crowd. Catherine's struggles grew weaker as the blood flow to his brain was restricted. His species' berserker training had taught him to ignore pain and fight through injuries, but it hadn't prepared him for an opponent who used technique instead of strength. After 8 seconds, Catherine tapped the mat 3 times, the universal signal for surrender. The entire training hall fell silent. Marcus released the hold immediately and stepped back, offering his hand to help his opponent stand. Catherine stared at the offered hand for a moment, then accepted it, allowing the much smaller human to pull him to his feet. "How?" Catherine asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "Your strength is nothing compared to mine. Your natural weapons are non-existent. By all combat logic, you should have been defeated in seconds." Marcus shrugged, feeling the weight of every alien eye in the hall upon him. "You relied on your advantages and ignored your weaknesses. I did the opposite." Instructor Thanemor's shifting form moved closer, studying Marcus with new interest. "Explain your strategy, human." "Catherine's species fights with overwhelming force," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady despite his racing heartbeat. "That force comes from commitment to each attack. But commitment means momentum, and momentum can be redirected." He gestured to the training mat where the fight had taken place. "I didn't try to match his strength because I knew I couldn't. Instead, I waited for him to overcommit, then used his own power against him. The leg sweep wasn't about my strength. It was about his balance being compromised by his attack pattern. And the submission hold?" Thanemor pressed. "Physics," Marcus replied simply. "Blood chokes work the same way regardless of species size or strength. Position and technique matter more than raw power." A new voice cut through the silence. "Interesting theory, Primitive." Vextar had pushed through the crowd to the front of the training area, his reptilian features twisted in a sneer. "But you simply faced an opponent who underestimated you. Let's see how your technique fares against someone who knows what you're capable of." Thanemor's form shifted slightly, considering. "This evaluation session is complete. Additional challenges require proper scheduling and I invoke right of challenge," Vextar interrupted, his voice carrying the formal tone required for Academy dueling protocols. The human's victory was luck, not skill. "I demand the opportunity to prove it." The hall erupted in excited murmurs. Right of challenge was rarely invoked during evaluation sessions, but once declared, it could not be refused without loss of honor. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized what was happening. "Vextar," Lyra said urgently from the crowd. "He's a first-day student. You're in your 4th year. This isn't a fair challenge." The Saurian's laugh echoed off the high ceiling. "Fair? Nothing about this situation is fair. A primitive species that discovered spaceflight 50 years ago does not belong in the Galactic Combat Academy. I will demonstrate why." Marcus looked to Instructor Thanemor, hoping for some intervention, but the alien's expression was unreadable. "Right of challenge has been properly invoked," the instructor said formally. "Marcus Chen, you may accept or decline. However, declining will result in immediate academic probation and mandatory remedial training." In other words, Marcus realized, declining would mark him as unworthy of being here. It would confirm every prejudice the other students held about humans being too weak for galactic combat standards. "I accept," Marcus said, his voice carrying more confidence than he felt. Vextar's scaled face spread in what might have been a smile. "Excellent. Let's end this charade quickly." The Saurian moved to the center of the training mat with predatory grace. Unlike Catherine's berserker style, Vextar's movements were controlled and precise. His species had conquered half their galaxy through military strategy. As much as individual combat prowess, he would make the same mistakes as the Krillian. "This will be different," Vextar announced loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "I know your tactics now. You rely on redirection and positioning, but what happens when your opponent refuses to overcommit? What happens when you face controlled aggression instead of berserker rage?" Marcus took his fighting stance again, but his mind was racing. Vextar was right. The strategy that had worked against Catherine wouldn't be effective against a more disciplined opponent. He needed something else, some other advantage he could exploit. Worried human? Vexter asked, beginning to circle the training mat like a hunting predator. Perhaps now you understand the difference between luck and skill. The watching crowd pressed closer, sensing that this match would be different from the first. Alien students from across the galaxy had gathered to witness whether the humans' victory had been a fluke or something more significant. Instructor Thanemore raised his hand. Combat begins now! Instead of charging like Catherine had, Vextar advanced slowly, testing Marcus with quick jabs and feints. His scaled hide provided natural armor, and his movements showed years of advanced training. Each strike was calculated, designed to probe Marcus's defenses without exposing himself to counterattack. Marcus found himself being pushed backward across the training mat. Vextar's disciplined approach was working perfectly. The human couldn't find openings to exploit because his opponent wasn't creating them. Every attack was controlled, every movement measured, you see? Vextar called out between strikes, his voice carrying to the watching crowd. Without an opponent's mistakes to exploit, human technique is useless. Primitive methods cannot overcome superior training and natural advantages. A tail strike caught Marcus across the ribs, sending him stumbling. The Saurian's tail was like a massive club, capable of breaking bones even through the Academy's safety protocols. Pain flared through Marcus's side as he struggled to maintain his balance. First clean strike to me, Vextar announced. 2 more and this demonstration ends. Marcus wiped blood from his mouth, his mind frantically searching for a new strategy. Everything Vextar said was true. Without an opponent's overconfidence or predictable patterns to exploit, what advantages did a human actually possess? Then he remembered something his grandfather had told him years ago. During one of their training sessions in the family garage back on Earth, every species evolves for their environment, the old Marine had said. Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a planet with variable gravity and weather. We're not the strongest or fastest, but we adapt better than anything else alive. Adaptation. That was the key. Marcus changed his entire approach mid-fight, something that confused not just Vexitar but every observer in the hall. Instead of trying to find openings in his opponent's defense, he began creating his own opportunities through constant movement and adaptation. Where Vextar expected him to retreat, Marcus suddenly advanced. Where the Saurian prepared for a defensive counter, Marcus launched an unexpected offensive combination. Each time Vextar adjusted to counter a technique, Marcus shifted to something completely different. It was like fighting liquid, the watching students realized. The human seemed to flow between fighting styles as if he had trained in dozens of different combat systems. One moment he moved like a boxer, the next like a wrestler, then like something none of them had ever seen before. What form is this? Demanded a technological symbiont student, his analytical systems struggling to categorize Marcus's constantly changing approach. It's not a form, Lyra breathed from the crowd. He's improvising, adapting in real time to counter whatever Vextar does. Vextar grew frustrated as his carefully planned attacks began missing their marks. The human's unpredictability was disrupting his strategic approach. Each time he thought he had figured out Marcus's pattern, the pattern changed completely. A high kick aimed at Marcus's head met empty air as the human dropped into a wrestling stance and shot for Vextar's legs. The Saurian barely managed to sprawl backward, avoiding the takedown attempt, but the sudden change in elevation and strategy forced him to abandon his planned counterattack. Stand still and fight properly, Vextar snarled, his disciplined composure beginning to crack. Marcus didn't respond verbally, but his movements became even more unpredictable. He mixed techniques from boxing, wrestling, judo, aikido, and martial arts that most aliens had never seen. More importantly, he began combining them in ways that created entirely new possibilities. A feinted punch became a judo throw attempt. When Vextar defended against the throw, Marcus smoothly transitioned into a boxing combination. When the Saurian adjusted to counter the punches, Marcus dropped low for a wrestling leg sweep that sent his opponent staggering. Impossible, whispered Gorth, the massive Ursine. Combat systems don't work that way. You master one discipline, perfect it over decades. You don't mix random techniques. But that was exactly what Marcus was doing, and somehow it was working. Each individual technique might not have been perfect by galactic standards, but the combinations and transitions were unlike anything the Academy students had ever encountered. Vextar landed his second clean strike, a backhand that caught Marcus across the jaw and sent him spinning. The safety protocols prevented serious injury, but the impact was still enough to daze the human for a crucial moment. "Second strike," Vextar announced, breathing heavily from the unexpected exertion of chasing an opponent who refused to fight predictably. "One more and I prove that human presence here is a mistake." The crowd was completely silent now, even the species that had been mocking Marcus earlier. Whatever they thought of human combat ability, they had to admit they were watching something unprecedented. Marcus shook off the effects of the strike, blood trickling from a split lip. His ribs ached from the first hit, and his jaw throbbed from the second. Vextar was right that one more clean strike would end the match. But Marcus was beginning to understand something important about galactic combat philosophy. Every species in the Academy had perfected their fighting style over millennia. They had optimized techniques, eliminated weaknesses, and created combat systems that were incredibly effective within their parameters. But that optimization also meant limitation. Vextar couldn't adapt beyond his training because his training was perfect for what it was designed to do. The same was true for every other species Marcus had observed. Their combat excellence came from perfection within defined boundaries, not from the ability to transcend those boundaries. Humans, Marcus realized, had never had the luxury of perfecting a single approach. Earth's diverse environments and constant conflicts had forced human martial arts to evolve along multiple paths simultaneously. Boxing from Europe, wrestling from various continents, martial arts from Asia, fighting techniques from Africa and the Americas, all developing in parallel, all influencing each other. What the galaxy saw as primitive, Marcus began to understand as flexible. What they interpreted as lacking focus, he recognized as adaptability. "You fight like you cannot decide what style to use," Vextar taunted, circling for his final attack. "Humans truly are confused creatures." "You're right," Marcus said, wiping blood from his lip. "I can't decide on one style, so I'll use all of them." This time, when Vextar attacked, Marcus didn't try to counter with a specific technique. Instead, he responded with pure adaptation. The Saurian's perfectly executed combination met a defense that shifted and flowed like water around stone. Marcus slipped a punch using boxing footwork, then immediately transitioned into an Aikido redirect that sent Vextar's follow-up strike harmlessly past his body. Before the Saurian could recover, Marcus had switched to wrestling, shooting in low for a takedown that his opponent couldn't have anticipated, because it came from a completely different fighting philosophy. Vextar hit the training mat hard, his scaled body skidding across the surface. For a moment he lay stunned, trying to process how a defensive boxing slip had somehow become an Aikido redirect that had transformed into a wrestling takedown in the space of 2 seconds. Marcus didn't give him time to figure it out. Moving with the smooth transitions that were becoming his signature, he flowed from the takedown into a judo pin, controlling Vextar's larger body through leverage and position rather than strength. The Saurian thrashed wildly, his superior strength evident as he tried to break free from the hold, but Marcus adjusted constantly, shifting his weight and grip to counter each escape attempt. When Vextar tried to power out to the left, Marcus was already moving right. When the Saurian attempted to bridge upward, Marcus had already transitioned to a different control position. 5 seconds dominant position, Instructor Thanemore announced, his shifting form leaning forward with interest. Vextar's struggles became more desperate. His perfect training had prepared him for many scenarios, but not for an opponent whose response changed faster than he could adapt. Every technique he attempted met a counter that seemed to come from a different combat philosophy entirely. 8 seconds. The watching crowd was completely motionless. Even the species that had been most dismissive of human capability were staring in fascination at what they were witnessing. 10 seconds. Victory to Marcus Chen. Marcus immediately released his hold and stepped back, offering his hand to help Vextar stand just as he had with Catherine. The Saurian stared at the offered hand for a long moment, his reptilian features showing a mixture of confusion and something that might have been respect. "I don't understand," Vextar said quietly as he accepted Marcus's help. "Your techniques were imperfect. Your strength was insufficient. Your experience was minimal. How did you defeat superior training and natural advantages? Marcus considered his answer carefully, aware that his response would be heard throughout the academy and likely recorded for analysis by military strategists across the galaxy. You're right about everything, he said finally. I'm weaker, slower, and less experienced than almost everyone here. But you all learned to perfect your fighting styles. I learned to adapt mine. Word of Marcus's victory spread through the academy faster than hyperspace communications. By the end of the day, alien students from every combat program were requesting permission to observe human training sessions. The library's xenobiology section was flooded with requests for information about Earth's fighting techniques. Marcus found himself at the center of attention he had never wanted. Everywhere he went, conversations stopped as alien students stared and whispered. Some looked intrigued, others skeptical, and a few seemed openly hostile to the idea that their combat philosophies might not be as superior as they had believed. This is highly irregular, said Combat Coordinator Velnath, addressing a packed assembly hall 3 days after Marcus's evaluation. The insectoid administrator's compound eyes swept across hundreds of students from dozens of species. In 5 centuries of academy operation, we have never had a first-year student defeat 2 upper-class opponents in their initial evaluation period. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Marcus sat in the front row trying to ignore the weight of every alien gaze upon him. Beside him, Lyra provided quiet moral support, while Kethryn and even Vextar had taken seats nearby in what seemed like protective positioning. The Academy Council has reviewed extensive recordings of these matches. Velnath continued. Our analysis has led to unprecedented conclusions about the nature of combat adaptability and the limitations of specialized training. The murmurs grew louder. Marcus heard fragments of conversation in various alien languages, most of them expressing disbelief or concern about what the administrator might announce. However, Velnath's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Exceptional performance demands exceptional testing. Marcus Chen of Earth approached the platform. Marcus's stomach dropped as he walked to the front of the assembly hall. The platform raised him above the crowd of alien faces, making him feel exposed and vulnerable under the bright academy lighting. The Academy Council has voted to implement a comprehensive evaluation of human combat methodology, Velnath announced. This evaluation will consist of progressive challenges designed to determine the true extent and limitations of human adaptability. A technological symbiont student raised his hand. What does progressive challenges mean? Velnath's compound eyes focused on Marcus as she answered. Marcus Chen will face 1 opponent per day for the next 10 days. Each opponent will be selected from progressively higher academy levels, culminating in a match against a certified academy instructor. The assembly hall erupted in shocked exclamations. Facing academy instructors was something that even advanced students rarely did outside of their final examinations. First-year students were never exposed to that level of combat expertise. This is madness, shouted Gorth from his seat. Instructors train galactic military specialists. They have decades of combat experience against the best warriors in known space. A human child will be seriously injured. The safety protocols remain in effect, Velnath replied calmly. However, the challenge progression will test human adaptability against increasingly sophisticated opponents. If human combat methodology is truly as versatile as initial evidence suggests, Marcus Chen should be able to adapt to any challenge level. Marcus felt his hands beginning to shake. Fighting advanced students was one thing, but academy instructors were legends. They had trained warriors who went on to become galactic champions, military commanders, and planetary defense specialists. I request permission to decline this evaluation, Marcus said, his voice barely carrying to the back of the assembly hall. Request denied, Velnath said immediately. Your performance has raised questions about the fundamental nature of combat training throughout galactic civilization. These questions require definitive answers. Another student, this one from a species Marcus didn't recognize, stood up. What happens if the human succeeds? What happens if he defeats an academy instructor? Velnath's pause was longer this time, her compound eyes reflecting the assembly hall lighting in complex patterns. If Marcus Chen defeats a certified academy instructor in single combat, the Academy Council will be forced to reconsider our entire educational methodology. Such an outcome would suggest that adaptability might be more valuable than specialization. The implications of that statement sent shockwaves through the assembled students. If human adaptability could overcome galactic combat mastery, it would fundamentally challenge everything they understood about warfare and training. This evaluation will also serve another purpose, Velnath continued, her voice cutting through the growing chaos. Each match will be broadcast live to military academies throughout the galaxy. Combat specialists from every major civilization will observe and analyze human methodology. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face, bad enough that he would be fighting increasingly dangerous opponents. But now his victories or defeats would be witnessed by military leaders across known space. The pressure was beyond anything he had ever imagined. The first challenge begins tomorrow, Velnath announced. Dismissed. As the assembly dispersed, Marcus found himself surrounded by a mixture of well-wishers and skeptics. Most aliens seemed genuinely curious about what would happen, but a few clearly resented the attention being given to what they still considered a primitive species. You don't have to do this, Lyra said quietly as they walked back to the dormitory levels. There must be some way to appeal the council's decision. There isn't, said a new voice behind them. They turned to see Instructor Thanemore, his shifting form barely visible in the corridor lighting. The council's decision is final and honestly necessary. Marcus stopped walking. Sir? Your victories have created a crisis of confidence throughout galactic military establishments, Thanemore explained. For millennia we have believed that combat mastery requires specialized training and natural advantages. If a human with minimal training can defeat experienced warriors through pure adaptability, it challenges everything we teach. They resumed walking, Thanemore's form flickering slightly as he moved. Military commanders across the galaxy are demanding proof that their training methodologies remain valid. The only way to provide that proof is to test human adaptability against progressively greater challenges. And if I lose? Marcus asked. Then galactic military doctrine remains unchanged and human combat methodology is classified as effective only against overconfident or unprepared opponents. And if I win? Thanemore's pause was lengthy. Then we face the possibility that everything we think we know about combat training is incomplete. They had reached the dormitory level, but none of them moved toward their rooms. The weight of the conversation seemed to demand resolution before they separated. What advice can you give me? Marcus asked. None, Thanemore replied immediately. I am prohibited from providing coaching or guidance during this evaluation period. However, I can tell you that your next opponent will be Jackson of the Warrior Caste Nomads. Marcus had heard of the Warrior Caste Nomads. They were a species that lived entirely for combat, spending their lives traveling between conflicts throughout the galaxy. They had no home planet, no civilian population, no occupation except warfare. Every member of their species was born into battle and trained from childhood to be the perfect warrior. Jackson has been at this academy for 6 years, Thanemore continued. He has defeated over 300 opponents in formal combat and has never lost a single match. His species considers defeat in single combat to be worse than death. Marcus felt his stomach clench. Wonderful. There is something else you should know, Thanemore added, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Jackson requested this match specifically. He considers your victories an insult to warrior culture throughout the galaxy. With that encouraging information, Thanemore flickered and vanished, leaving Marcus and Lyra alone in the corridor. I'm going to die tomorrow, Marcus said quietly. Maybe not, Lyra replied, though her voice lacked conviction. You've surprised everyone so far. Maybe you'll surprise them again. Marcus spent the night lying awake in his dormitory room, staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything that was happening. Back on Earth, his biggest worry had been making the Academy's soccer team. Now he was facing the possibility of fighting a professional warrior whose species lived for combat. When morning came, he felt exhausted and terrified, but also strangely determined. Whatever happened, he would face it with everything he had learned and everything human adaptability could provide. The training hall was packed beyond capacity when Marcus arrived. Students, instructors, and even academy administrators filled every available space. Holographic recording devices hovered throughout the hall, broadcasting the event to military establishments across the galaxy. Jackson was already waiting on the training mat. He stood 7 feet tall, his body covered in ritual scars that told the story of every battle he had fought. His species had evolved for warfare, with dense bone structure, enhanced reflexes, and a nervous system that processed pain as motivation rather than limitation. "Human," Jackson said as Marcus approached, his voice carrying the accent of someone who spoke a dozen languages, but considered none of them native. "I have studied recordings of your previous matches. Clever tricks against overconfident opponents. Today you face a true warrior." Marcus took his position on the training mat, his mind racing through every technique he had ever learned. Against Catherine, he had used redirection. Against Vexitar, he had relied on adaptation. Against Jackson, he would need something entirely different. Combat begins. Now. Jackson moved like lightning made flesh. Marcus had thought Vexitar was fast. Jackson moved like reality was optional. The warrior cast Nomad's first attack was a blur of motion that Marcus barely saw, let alone defended against. Only his desperate backward leap saved him from a strike that would have ended the match in the first second. But even as he dodged, Marcus was learning. Jackson's speed was incredible, but it followed patterns. Every warrior culture, no matter how advanced, developed systematic approaches to combat. The question was identifying those patterns quickly enough to survive long enough to exploit them. Jackson's second attack was a combination of strikes that came from 4 different angles simultaneously. Marcus tried to block, but the warrior's speed was overwhelming. A punch caught him in the shoulder, spinning him halfway around and sending him stumbling across the training mat. "First strike," Jackson announced, his voice calm despite the violent motion. "You move well for a primitive, but movement without purpose is merely delay." The watching crowd was completely silent. Even the alien students who had begun to believe in human adaptability looked concerned. Jackson was operating on a completely different level from any opponent Marcus had faced. Marcus steadied himself, ignoring the pain in his shoulder where Jackson's punch had landed. The warrior was right that simply dodging wouldn't be enough. But Marcus was beginning to notice something interesting about his opponent's attack patterns. Every strike was perfect. Jackson's technique was flawless, his positioning optimal, his timing precise. It was like watching a combat computer execute ideal responses to every situation. And that perfection, Marcus realized, might be exploitable in a way that imperfection couldn't be. Jackson attacked again. Another blindingly fast combination that should have overwhelmed any defense. But this time, Marcus didn't try to block or dodge everything. Instead, he deliberately left himself open to one strike while perfectly defending against the others. The warrior's punch caught Marcus in the ribs, exactly where he had intended it to. The impact sent pain shooting through his body, but it also did something unexpected. It disrupted Jackson's perfect attack pattern. "Curious," Jackson said, pausing his assault. "You accepted that strike deliberately. Explain." Marcus wiped blood from his mouth, his mind racing through possibilities. "You fight perfectly. Every technique is exactly as it should be. Every movement optimized for maximum efficiency. Of course, imperfection leads to defeat. But perfection is also predictable," Marcus continued, circling slowly around the training mat. "When I know you'll always choose the optimal response, I can create situations where your optimal response gives me what I need." Jackson's scarred face showed genuine interest. "And what do you need?" Instead of answering, Marcus launched his own attack. Not the flowing, adaptive style he had used against his previous opponents, but something entirely different. He attacked with deliberate imperfection, using techniques that were obviously flawed, movements that created openings in his own defense. Jackson responded exactly as Marcus had hoped he would. The warrior's training demanded that he exploit every opening, counter every attack with optimal technique. But Marcus wasn't trying to land strikes. He was trying to guide Jackson's responses. Each imperfect attack created a specific opening that demanded a specific counter. Each counter moved Jackson to exactly where Marcus wanted him to be. After 30 seconds of this strange dance, Marcus had maneuvered his opponent into the perfect position for what came next. As Jackson launched what should have been a match-ending combination, Marcus finally revealed his true strategy. Every mistake he had made, every opening he had given, had been designed to set up a single moment where Jackson's perfect technique would work against him. The warrior's flawless attack met a defense that had been planned from the beginning of the exchange. Marcus slipped inside Jackson's guard using a movement that should have been impossible given their previous positions, but which became possible because of exactly how he had guided the warrior's responses. For the first time in the match, Marcus was the one moving at optimal speed. His counter wasn't random adaptation like his previous fights. It was a precisely planned sequence that used Jacksoon's own perfection as the foundation for his defeat. The throw that followed was textbook judo, executed with timing and leverage that even Jackson's enhanced reflexes couldn't counter. The warrior hit the training mat hard, his perfect balance finally disrupted by an attack that had been building through the entire exchange. Marcus transitioned smoothly into a submission hold, but not one that relied on strength or even traditional technique. Instead, he applied pressure to specific nerve clusters that his grandfather had shown him years ago, targeting points that were vulnerable regardless of species or physical enhancement. Jackson struggled, his warrior instincts demanding that he escape, but the hold had been designed specifically for opponents with superior strength and speed. The more he fought, the more the pressure increased on nerve points that couldn't be strengthened through training. Impossible, someone whispered from the crowd. Jackson's struggles grew weaker as the nerve pressure disrupted his enhanced reflexes. His species' pain tolerance was legendary, but this technique wasn't causing pain. It was temporarily disrupting the neural pathways that controlled motor function. After 8 seconds, Jackson's body went limp as the nerve hold took full effect. He was conscious but temporarily unable to move, a condition that would reverse itself within minutes but which constituted complete defeat under Academy rules. Marcus released the hold immediately, helping to support Jackson as feeling returned to the warrior's limbs. The training hall was completely silent except for the hum of recording devices capturing everything for analysis by military experts across the galaxy. "How?" Jackson asked once he could speak clearly again. "I have fought opponents from every warrior culture in known space. I have studied every combat system in the galactic databases. What was that technique?" Marcus helped the warrior sit up, his own hands shaking slightly from exhaustion and adrenaline. "It wasn't a technique. It was a strategy built around your techniques." He gestured to the training mat where the fight had taken place. "You fight perfectly, which means you always choose the optimal response to any situation. I used that predictability to guide you into a position where the optimal response was exactly what I needed for my counter." And the final hold? Nerve disruption. My grandfather learned it from human military training. It works on any species with a central nervous system. Marcus paused, then added quietly, "It's not a superior technique. It's just one you hadn't encountered before." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, processing what had happened. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a respect that hadn't been there before the match. "In 6 years at this academy, you are the first opponent to defeat me through pure strategy, rather than attempting to match my abilities." He struggled to his feet, still feeling the effects of the nerve hold. "I have fought the greatest warriors in the galaxy, and I have learned something from each defeat. Today I learned that perfection itself can be a weakness." The assembled crowd was still processing what they had witnessed when Combat Coordinator Velnath approached the training mat. Her compound eyes focused on Marcus with what might have been surprise. "Marcus Chen of Earth," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed hall. "In 13 seconds of actual combat engagement, you have defeated one of the most accomplished warriors in Academy history. This performance exceeds all predictions and requires immediate evaluation by the full Academy Council." She paused, her insectoid head tilting slightly. "However, there is one more challenge that must be completed before final assessment can begin." Marcus felt his heart sink. "Ma'am, your original stated goal was to earn a black belt. While this ranking system is unfamiliar to galactic combat classification, the Academy Council has determined that achieving this goal requires one final demonstration." The hall grew even quieter, if such a thing was possible. "Tomorrow you will face Academy Combat Master Drelnoth in single combat. Victory will result in the first black belt certification in galactic history. Defeat will result in standard academic placement appropriate to your demonstrated skill level." Marcus stared at her in shock. Combat Master Drelnoth was a legend even among Academy instructors. He had trained 3 galactic combat champions and had never lost a match against any opponent, student or instructor, in over 20 years of service, ma'am, Marcus said carefully. "I don't think I'm ready for that level of challenge." "Perhaps not," Velnath agreed. "But ready or not, tomorrow you will face the ultimate test of human adaptability. The entire galaxy will be watching to see if a human teenager can truly earn what you call a black belt in just 13 seconds of combat." As the assembly dispersed, Marcus realized that his original goal of proving himself worthy of the academy had somehow transformed into something